Good morning, everyone, to everyone joining us today from every time zone. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker, and I am Executive Director of the Albert Shanker Institute, a think tank founded to strengthen public education, worker voice, and democracy while promoting healthy, open, and vigorous dialogue and debate. It is a privilege to host this mini conference today, working for the common good at the bargaining table and beyond. We are going to ignite continued growth in common good work in our unions and our communities. If you are tweeting today, join me using the hashtag #OneU4Good. That's 1U, the number 4, good, to continue the conversation on social media. Bargaining for the common good remains a potent place to secure victories because the negotiating table remains an incredible place to organize for progress. And today, we're going to hear about a significant victory and some significant work for the common good by the American Postal Workers Union. And our unions across the country are seeking out opportunities to improve people's lives everywhere there is an organizing opportunity beyond the bargaining table, as you will hear from the incredible work from the Communication Workers of America in state and federal legislatures, and the American Federation of Teachers in the judicial system. Common good work has been the foundation of union work since unions were first organized. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Joseph McCartin, who's a professor and executive director of the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. He's going to provide a brief historical perspective of common good work by unions. Thank you for joining us today, Professor McCartin.
Thank you so much, Mary Catherine. What a pleasure it is to be part of this. And as Mary Catherine said, I'm a professor of labor history. I've been working closely with unions and community groups that have been involved in bargaining for the common good now, at least since 2014. So what is bargaining for the common good? I wanted to provide a quick overview for you of this movement, where it began, and how it's developed over time. Let's go to that. What are the origins of this movement, bargaining for the common good, of this approach, working for the common good? As Mary Catherine said, this is an approach that's as old almost as the labor movement itself. It dates back at least to the 1880s, I would say, to the Knights of Labor, to its mixed assemblies, as they were called, which acted as kind of community unions, bringing workers and community together around common demands. It also is a movement that has gone through iterations over time and into our own time in recent times, from the 1880s and the Knights of Labor to the 1980s, to just Jobs with Justice, and to the Union Cities program of the AFL-CIO in the 1990s. These were modern day iterations of this long history of labor community alignment and working for the common good. Bargaining for the common good is also about reviving another part of American labor tradition, and that is thinking about collective bargaining in broad terms. And this also is something that's deeply rooted in the movement's history. There are many teachers unionists with us today, and many of you, I'm sure, know that some of the pioneers of teacher unionism, like Margaret Haley and Catherine Goggin, in Chicago at the turn of the last century, began to organize teachers and to fight to win proper funding for the school systems by pursuing tax dodgers, working for the common good in that way. The industrial union movement also embraced common good approaches, you might say, as well. Coming out of World War II, for example, the United Automobile Workers in 1945 and into 1946 went on a long strike against General Motors, which placed the issues of consumers on the bargaining table as well. The union demanded a 30% wage increase. Their wages had been frozen during the war, but they demanded that General Motors not pass on that wage increase directly to consumers. And they challenged the company to open its books because they believed that if GM did that, it would show that they could raise wages, hold prices stable, and still make a healthy profit. They didn't win all of that at the bargaining table, but they put down a marker in which the union was defending not only its members' interests, but that of the broader community. In the mid-60s, public sector unionists in New York City, part of AFSCME, went on strike in a strike of welfare caseworkers. And in that effort, they demanded not only improvements in their wages and working conditions, but improvements in the welfare system itself. They wanted more caseworkers hired. They wanted to fix a broken system. So for a long history, the labor movement has functioned as a defender of the common good, and bargaining for the common good builds on that tradition. The examples I've just given you all highlight, I think, one other crucial part of bargaining for the common good, and that is reviving an important part of labor's approach to collective bargaining as a democratic exercise, recovering bargaining's democratic power. In the 1930s, when the industrial union movement was growing, it was very common for unionists to not talk of collective bargaining so much as what they called industrial democracy. They viewed what they were fighting for was more than wages, hours, and working conditions, but democratizing the workplace and spreading democracy in our politics as well. That was the language used by John L. Lewis, as these pamphlets from the time indicate. Now, in our own time, bargaining for the common good has tried to build on these past precedents and to come up with innovative approaches to bargaining that rethink some of the limitations that developed in bargaining in the post-World War II period, to try to expand it by expanding first its participants, to bring community people as well as union people into the bargaining process, to expand its processes, opening up bargaining to greater scrutiny and accessibility, bringing community allies into the framing of bargaining demands very often, and also broadening the purposes of bargaining, more than simply wages, hours, and working conditions, but the larger framework in which workers as citizens, as taxpayers, and as consumers have to live and operate. And that's what we'll be hearing about today. Now, in our time, bargaining for the common good has developed over the past 20 years or so. You could date back experiments into the 90s, Jobs with Justice, Union Cities. We might get a chance to hear from Randi Weingarten about what she was doing at UFT at the turn of the century in New York City that presaged some of the recent trends in bargaining for the common good. But our own Mary Catherine played a key role in the development of bargaining for the common good in our time. The St. Paul teachers, which she led a decade ago, pioneered this approach in 2011 by opening up their bargaining to community participation. And again in 2013 and 14 by making demands that were in the community's interest as much as the unions. The Chicago teachers, when they went on strike in 2012, were fighting for the schools that Chicago's children deserve. And they challenged some of the inequities in school funding and how the finances of Chicago's school districts were being handled. They fought for the community as much as for their own members. In Los Angeles, SEIU and AFSCME came together in a campaign called Fix LA in 2014. They were pointing out that LA was at that time spending more in its fees paid to Wall Street firms that handled its bonds than it was actually spending maintaining the streets of LA, and fighting for a reallocation of funding to rectify that problem and to re-examine the relationships between the city and Wall Street. These efforts came together in 2014, along with others, in the formation of a new network called Bargaining for the Common Good, which has worked to develop these ideas and to bring more people into this fight for the common good approach. In recent years, and this is what we'll hear about today, there's been a tremendous and promising expansion of bargaining for the common good, and the who is fighting for this and the how. For one thing, this movement really began for the most part among public sector workers, but now it's expanding beyond that, as we'll hear with CWA's experience today. And it's also expanded beyond the bargaining table. It started out rooted there, but now, as we'll hear today, new venues for advancing the common good have been fought for, including through legislation, including through the courts and other things that we'll hear about shortly. So we're living through an important period in the development of this new and promising approach. Today we'll hear from the AFT about, as Mary Catherine said, their fight for public service loan forgiveness through the courts. We'll hear from CWA about their fight for broadband access, from the postal workers about their fight for postal banking, and more. And all of this, I think, could not be more timely or exciting. I think we can all agree on certain things right now. One is that our system of labor relations is pretty badly broken. We see inequality surging around this country. Democracy is threatened. The planet is threatened in many ways. It's clearer than ever that we need new tools to resist these trends and to forge deeper solidarities in this fragmenting nation. Fighting for the common good has never been more necessary than it is at this moment. And I think the most important thing we can say is that when we fight this way, we win. And so it's wonderful to be together, to have this opportunity to discuss bargaining for the common good today. If you want to learn more about this movement, bargainingforthecommongood.org. And so that's a brief overview. I'm delighted to be with you. Mary Catherine, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. To everyone who is joining us today, that is the timeline you are joining. As you can see, unions have been working for the common good for decades into the last century. And as you join us today, you are joining that work in the common good, whether it is at the bargaining table or pushing the boundaries of common good work across the country, as you'll hear from unions today. I want to start with a bargaining table example because, and Joe, thank you very much for your shout out. A lot of the common good work our unions have been doing has been tapping into that power at the bargaining table. And we have some stellar examples today to share from the American Postal Workers Union. Marc Diamondstein is with us today. He is the president of the American Postal Workers Union. He represents more than 200,000 employees of the U.S. Postal Service and approximately 1,500 employees in the private sector mailing industry. Marc began his postal career in 1983 and has been an activist his whole career. Marc, we are excited to have you here today to start off our bedrock stories and share your common good story of all of the work you have been doing for all of us at the bargaining table.
Well, it's exciting to be here, and solidarity greetings to one and all, and thanks so much for the invitation to share some of our perspectives on this important subject of working for the common good at the bargaining table and beyond. And I'm very pleased to be here with AFT President Randy Weingarten and CWA President Chris Shelton, both leading very important work in their unions on this issue and the fight for the common good. Let me say before I get started, this looks like it's going to be a very exciting day for the labor movement. It may be the first big breakthrough in beachhead at Amazon at the big warehouse in Staten Island. If they prevail, I think it underscores we should never underestimate the self-determination, so to speak, and the independent action of workers and the courage of workers. And in Bessemer, Alabama, workers are definitely holding their own, and it looks like it's a too close to call election and a big step forward from the first one. So I just wanted to mention that. I know it's a little off subject, but I think it's going to be an exciting day. Let me point out from the onset, with us as postal workers in the public postal service, we are in essence, we are deeply ingrained. We are the public commons. We are the public good. And the Postal Reorganization Act in 1970 summed it up this way. The United States Postal Service shall be operated as a basic and fundamental service provided to the people by the government of the United States, authorized by the Constitution, created by act of Congress, and supported by the people. And the Postal Service shall have as its basic function the obligation to provide postal services to bind the nation together. And of course, the pandemic once again underscored just how invaluable and necessary and needed the Postal Service is to the people of the country, where binding the nation together took on a new meaning in this tragic and challenging times. So I want to share 3 examples of some of our modest efforts, but I do want to point out one thing that Joe McCartan said, which is postal workers and all workers not only want the best of working conditions, we want safe working conditions, good living wages, non-discrimination in the workplace, seniority taking the place of favoritism, and all these important things. But we live in our communities. That's where our families are raised. So there's a direct interconnection, and there should be an interconnection between the fight for workers' rights in the four walls in which the workplaces that we work in, and social justice in our communities, whether that's expanding voting rights, fighting for a clean, safe environment, for living wages for all, healthcare is a human right, and against rising authoritarianism and rising fascism, all of which deeply affects our families, our friends, our neighbors, and our communities. And I do want to point out, we have received great support and solidarity from the people of this country in defending the public postal service from privatization. And in fact, the CWA and AFT, who I'm joining with today, are among the 80+ national organizations that make up our Grand Alliance to save our public postal service. But for us, it's very important for our members to understand that solidarity cannot and should not be a one-way street. And we stand in solidarity with the just demands of our many community allies. So let me share 3 examples quickly. First example, the struggle to expand basic financial services offered through the public postal service. In 2015, we entered into bargaining for a new collective bargaining agreement, our union contract, covering approximately 200,000 postal workers. And we, the APW, proffered a proposal to have right in our contract a task force to address enhanced and expanded services. And we were able to reach an agreement that included a task force that had regular meetings, research, information, and commitments to develop some pilot programs on enhanced and expanded services. And it's behind this contractual achievement, only one memo and a giant contract, but it's behind this contractual provision that our union has been pushing very hard for expanded financial services to address the scourge of payday lending and the check cashing industry. And we have made very small progress and are pushing for broader pilot programs to try out paycheck cashing services, and then build off those initial efforts to put ATMs into post offices, bill paying, remittances overseas, and the like. So how does it address the common good? 80 million people in the United States are either unbanked or underbanked, and millions get stuck in this predatory payday cashing, payday lending industry. And according to the Office of Inspector General of the Postal Service, in their report of 2014, the cost of fees and services for low-income workers making approximately $25,000 a year is 10% of their income when people get stuck in this predatory financial so-called industry. Some people pointed out it would make the mafia blush in terms of what they make off loans and other services. About half of African-American households are underbanked. 42% of Hispanic households are underbanked. So expanded financial services on the road to achieving postal banking, run through the public institution by trained and trusted postal workers, would be a great service to the people of this country and a great example of the common good. Second example, the 2020 US election took place in the midst of this tragic COVID pandemic, and safe access to the ballot box for tens of millions of voters would hang in the balance. Vote by mail was a large part of the solution. Vote by mail is proven, secure method of voting. It's actually been done since the Civil War, and it's ever more popular with the people, even prior to the pandemic. Yet we had a president at the time who was already railing against election mail, although he votes that way himself. And mail was being slowed down by newly implemented postal policies in the summer of 2020, jeopardizing the election process itself and jeopardizing the people's ability to exercise the cherished, hard-fought right to vote. But the people of the country rose up in defense of better postal services and for the integrity of the elections, full access to the ballot box through election mail. The fight back included successful legal action by the civil rights community and a number of state attorney generals. And Postal Service management leadership was compelled to step up, and at the request of one of the postal unions, invited postal unions to join a national postal headquarters election mail task force. But our union took it one step further. We engaged in collective bargaining to expand this national joint election mail task force to the local level where ballots were being transported, sorted, processed, and delivered. And we succeeded in gaining an agreement from postal management and established joint labor management election mail committees at hundreds of local processing facilities around the country. And when I say joint, I mean they were made up of representatives of the unions, the postal unions, and of management. And these committees, on a nonpartisan basis and part of our civic responsibility, enabled management and the unions to work together to ensure that ballots were effectively and timely moved through the postal system. 65 million ballots in the 2020 presidential election were cast through the mail, with 99.7% arriving on time. And that doesn't mean if one did not arrive on time, it didn't get counted. It just may have been one day after when it should have been there. Then in early 2020, in relation to the special Senate elections in Georgia, we also negotiated a memorandum with management focused specifically on election mail in that state in the special Senate election. And we allowed, through collective bargaining, we allowed postal management to keep holiday help longer than they normally would have been able to under our union agreement. But we allowed the people to stay in the state of Georgia to ensure successful vote by mail in the special election. In our last round of bargaining just completed, we negotiated this national election mail task force into our national union agreement for the first time. Third example, late 2021, in December, the White House announced plans to send COVID test kits to homes of people who ordered them. Certainly, this was an initiative we supported in this continuing public health crisis. And there was no better entity than the Public Postal Service with its universal service mandate, serving all 160 plus million addresses in the country 6 days a week to carry out this task. The administration, the White House, predicted there would be over 100 million orders, a big task for a public institution that is not routinely set up, at least at this current time, to handle such an e-commerce operation. But we stepped up to the plate, and the APW negotiated with management provisions that allowed the Postal Service to retain, once again, temporary holiday help beyond our existing contractual limitations in order to make the project the success it has been. And our local unions throughout the country, because they had these special test kit sites in 43 places, our local unions in those sites where they were processing the test kits worked locally with local management to have the kind of flexibility needed for this project to succeed. Look, there are other opportunities and possibilities that we're involved with for the public good we're pursuing, such as advocating for an all-electric postal fleet, a charging station network throughout the postal system that the public could also use, and access to a variety of government services. But I will leave you for now with the three examples above. And my one closing thought, that to make it all happen, to bring it real success, such as in the financial services realm, which has great opposition from Wall Street, from the banking community, and certainly plenty of people on Capitol Hill, and really in postal management. But to make it all happen, Our ongoing collective bargaining efforts have to be based on powerful movements, the street heat, to ensure that these demands and programs will see the light of day and come to life in a robust fashion. So I turn it back to you. I hope I didn't go over my 10 minutes, but again, it's a pleasure to be here to share some of our stories and to learn from others about theirs as well. Thank you, Mary. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It is amazing. And quite frankly, every person on this Zoom and every neighbor we have has benefited from the work of the American Postal Workers Union. Thank you so much for your vision. As I said in the intro, we have union examples of bargaining for the common good across the country, from that stellar example you just heard from the American Postal Workers Union to local examples in your own community. But our unions have been pushing the boundaries of common good work. As you heard from Joe McCartan, we are dusting off a legacy that was founded for us over 100 years ago in working alongside our community and working in places where our unions have built power with our communities. The Communication Workers of America have been doing this kind of work for a long time. It's my pleasure to have Chris Shelton, who is president of the Communication Workers of America, with us this morning. He started his career as an outside technician and first served as a shop steward before becoming chair, then vice president of CWA District 1, and before being elected by acclamation as president in 2015. Chris, thank you so much for joining us to share all of the progress you have made in both federal and state legislatures.
Thank you, Mary Catherine, and thanks to the Shanker Institute for hosting this important event. I know I'm here to discuss our Build Broadband Better campaign, and I will, but first, I want to share the story of an extraordinary bargaining campaign for the common good, mobilization and strike last fall by nearly 3,000 CWA healthcare workers at Catholic Health in Buffalo. Bargaining in the middle of a pandemic presents many unique challenges, especially in healthcare. The situation in Buffalo was particularly dire, with hospitals in the Catholic health system struggling financially. Years of mismanagement put staffing and patient care on the back burner in favor of a questionable capital investment. Our members came to the table ready to fight for their jobs and for quality care for their patients. The stakes were high. The common good was truly at the center of this contract campaign. Catholic Health, on the other hand, came to the table with a set of regressive proposals that would have further undermined the hospital's ability to attract and retain staff. We built a community coalition to advocate for a contract that would address patient care by including safe staffing ratios and the wage and benefit package necessary to attract and retain workers. We engaged elected officials to echo those concerns. We launched a public education campaign to document and highlight workers' concerns about dangerous understaffing at the hospitals. Critically, that campaign included testimonials from dozens of healthcare workers sharing the specific ways that understaffing affected their ability to provide for quality patient care. While we had hoped to reach an agreement without a strike, when a strike became necessary, the public understood that the workers had reached a breaking point and that their fight was a fight for the health of the entire community. The strike lasted 35 days. The contract we were able to negotiate includes a specific enforceable safe staffing ratio, a real safe staffing ratio, one of the only a handful of contracts outside the state of California to do that. We raised wages across the board, bringing all workers above $15 an hour, and preserved our health and retirement plans. The contract was ratified with 94% voting yes. While our work on safe staffing goes back many years and laid the foundation for our successful campaign in Buffalo, the pandemic and the exceptional sacrifices that healthcare workers have made over the last 2 years gave the issue more resonance and urgency. The situation is similar with broadband. We've been very active in pushing for broadband access, closing the digital divide, and fighting for oversight and accountability for a long time, before it was even on the radar screen for a lot of people. Our members saw firsthand where providers were putting in high-speed connections and where they were not, and who was being left behind. Back in the fall of 2006, we started our Speed Matters project to bring attention to the need for universal broadband. We followed the presidential primary candidates around Iowa to talk to them about it and get them to pledge to take action. We still have sitting in my office a banner hanging up that President Barack Obama and Joe Biden, Vice President, signed in the early months of the campaign. One of the things we were advocating for was higher standards for what internet speeds qualify as broadband. At the time, policymakers didn't really have a good sense of whether or not people were getting what they were paying for. They knew what the companies were telling them, but sometimes what the companies say and what people actually get are two very different things. So we worked with a company to develop a custom internet speed test that we pushed out across the country. For 4 years, we did annual reports with maps broken down by zip codes. Eventually, in 2011, the FCC caught up with us and created their own speed test and annual report, which helps hold the internet providers accountable. We've made progress since 2006, but not enough. Telecom companies build next generation fiber networks where it's profitable, dense, wealthier areas. That has left more than 1/3 of US households without true broadband service, either because of availability or affordability. Federal funds to subsidize broadband build-out were scarce, and we saw that even when companies did build broadband with federal dollars, they often used low-road, non-union contractors that cut corners to speed through construction jobs, risking safety and quality. The pandemic brought greater urgency to closing the digital divide. Suddenly, our whole lives moved online. Millions of workers went remote. Virtual healthcare visits became routine. And most of all, and I know that Randy and every single member of AFT can back me up on this, our educational system became utterly dependent on the access of teachers and students to fast, reliable internet connections. Our country's failure to provide those connections meant that workers without adequate access had to put their health at risk or lose their jobs. It meant that seniors in rural areas could not safely check in with their doctors about chronic health conditions. It meant that parents sat with their kids in McDonald's parking lots, hoping to connect to Wi-Fi so that they could attend class. So we rebooted Speed Matters with a new project called Build Broadband Better. Build Broadband Better is a comprehensive campaign to make sure that our country invests in high-quality internet access and closes the digital divide while creating good jobs in our communities. To do this, we are working to ensure that the broadband funding in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act goes to the best technology available, fiber optic broadband, rather than lower quality wireless or cable offerings. And these projects are built by employees who create good paying jobs with labor protections and a right to organize and bargain collectively. The bill contains $65 billion for expanding broadband. We, along with allies like Senators Sherrod Brown, Jackie Rosen, and Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, successfully included a requirement to prioritize broadband projects from entities that have a demonstrated record of and plans to be in compliance with federal labor and employment laws. The powerful thing about our Build Broadband Better project is that it is driven by CWA members all across the country. We created a member-led broadband brigade, providing them with in-depth training on broadband policy and building their lobbying and public speaking skills. A group of brigade leaders meets weekly with CWA legislative, policy, and communication staff to set priorities. These leaders are responsible for creating networks of CWA members in their states who can share information with each other, collect stories about what is happening on the ground, and talk to legislators and regulators. They are also sharing information in their communities and developing alliances with community organizations who represent residents who are most likely to lack affordable broadband access. Rural communities, older Americans, people of color, and lower income families. Of the $65 billion in funding, $42.5 billion will be distributed to the states by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is part of the Commerce Department. States must submit a 5-year action plan to receive funds. The states will then award grants to projects. We've been consulting with the Biden administration to make sure that state plans for project funding have the strongest possible labor standards, employ local workers, require transparency about subcontracting, and prioritize fiber to the premise connections. Our brigade members are actively engaging with their state broadband agencies, and in some cases, sit on the task forces that will be developing the broadband action plans and criteria for project funding. Another key area of engagement is on workforce training issues. I am a member of the administration's Interagency Telecommunications Workforce Working Group, which is developing recommendations to address the workforce needs created by the massive investment in broadband. At the local level, our leaders and members are helping to develop training and certification programs and to connect former CWA technicians who have left the industry with new jobs. One other aspect of the work I'll mention is on the affordability issue. In addition to the funding for broadband build-out, the infrastructure bill has $14 billion to make broadband more affordable through the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program. This program gives qualifying households a $30 per month subsidy for broadband service, which increases to $75 per month in tribal areas. It also provides digital equity grant funds to states to provide devices and support to get households connected. We are partnering with the FCC to distribute information about the program. Our members have distributed leaflets in their communities, worked with community organizations serving low-income residents to get the word out, and worked with members of Congress to hold town hall meetings about the Affordable Connectivity Program. We've got a lot of tough issues to tackle. The pandemic has made the digital divide impossible to ignore. I believe it has also mobilized people to demand more from their employers and from the government. With our Build Broadband Better program, CWA is focused on creating more good jobs for our members and ensuring that federal funds are spent properly and service is delivered as it was promised. We are working to lift up all our communities by providing affordable, reliable, and fast broadband internet connections to everyone, no matter where they live. Our members get that, and we are proud to be putting their experience and expertise to work for the common good. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much. Again, a great example of how all of us in this mini conference today are benefiting from the work of the communication workers of America. Next, it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce Randy Weingarten. As you heard just very briefly in Joe McCartan's history, while I appreciate Joe's shout out to me and to Randy at the UFT, it is it's my pleasure to let you know that Randy was an incredible mentor to me when I was a local president in St. Paul, Minnesota. She supported me and encouraged me and helped me brainstorm those opportunities to push the boundaries, to work alongside our communities, and to not only commit to those wages, benefits, and working conditions issues, but to look to see how we could work alongside the community to improve people's lives in St. Paul. Randy, as you know, is president of the American Federation of Teachers, an AFL-CIO affiliated union of 1.7 million teachers, paraprofessionals, school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators. Randy is a talented social studies teacher and a brilliant lawyer, as you'll soon hear, and it is my pleasure to ask her to share her exemplary national story as well. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. And I also I saw that Marilyn Schneiderman is on, who has really studied and actually helped others develop the muscle of bargaining for the common good. So I just wanted to shout out Marilyn, and I also want to say I want to shout out Joe for really kind of centering this conversation, Joe McCartan. And I want to thank my colleagues here, Marc Demenstein and Chris Shelton, because you've gotten in a very granular way, not only the theory of bargaining for the common good or bargaining for the public good, but you have really good examples that you can see, touch, and feel of why it actually does take a union and the economic power that we bring, even in a period of time when, you know, we have much reduced density, to try to solve issues of common concern. And, you know, so broadband, I'm going to get to that in a second, because I think it's, you know, such a shared, I mean, it was such a frustrating moment to me, and thank God for CWA's campaign, because without that, you know, what we would be getting with a lot of the corporations that will advertise about what they're doing in this moment, they'll do a little experiment. They'll do a little, you know, possibility in a couple of cities or states, or and what Chris is doing and what CWA is doing is actually trying to make this real for everyone. And if you don't think that was needed, any person with children during this last 2 years, every teacher understands why broadband for all in an affordable way is needed. So I'm really grateful, as are, I'm sure, most families in America, for this campaign, which is a win-win, because it's also about the dignity of workers and the creation of work in a union space to be able to do the kind of broadband that is now being paid for out of the infrastructure bill, but needs to be affordable for the end users, including parents and kids. And what Marc said, just about, you know, the payday lending, the voting by mail. Like, if you think about things that are really primal for people, finding a way to make sure that that check gets converted to cash in a way that is real. And post offices, I mean, one of the few things that are left in McDowell County, West Virginia, which is one of the places, the 8th poorest county in America, rural area, one of the places that we work in, a post office, fighting for that local post office, having that local post office have the kind of services that are needed, making sure it's staffed, just like Chris just said about healthcare and postal work and our work. But also, and Marc and I talk about this all the time. You know, I think people used to think we were like the the Debbie Downers at the AFL-CIO Executive Council who would say, democracy is at risk here. Now everybody sees democracy is at risk. But the action to actually make sure that people could vote and vote by mail, and doing it when you have Louis DeJoy there, instead of just saying, oh no, it can't possible, he's a jerk. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that on a Zoom, but he's terrible. But figuring out the workaround and figuring out the advocacy. That the reason I'm dwelling on these two things and wanted to speak after my two colleagues is not only to throw them some gratitude, but also to connect the dots here, that this is bargaining for the common good. Yes, of course, it is about how we have the staffing we need and how we have the job security and the benefits that we need. But it is the work we do on these kind of issues that have a direct effect on the public good and the common good and people's well-being. And look, that's what we try to do in schools too. I mean, obviously, everything we do, and I see a lot of schools people here, reading, writing, and arithmetic, helping kids succeed, helping kids have access to critical thinking and problem solving, building relationships, all of those things that a school teacher or paraprofessional does every single day, all of that is to the benefit of the children we teach and to the future we hope to have. But part of what the people who hated unions tried to do is to say, nope, you can only negotiate terms and conditions. You can only negotiate wages and benefits, not the other terms and conditions of employment, not the things that are necessary for you to do the jobs to make the job not only doable, but to actually help create a climate where parents want to, a school where parents want to send their children to, where educators want to work, where kids thrive. And what Mary Catherine and I talked about a long time ago was, no, those are artificial limitations of what problem solving should be. And that, whether in the legal jargon, they're called permissive subjects of bargaining or impermissible subjects of bargaining, this is about our work. And we're going to kind of vitiate those limitations and try to actually do that. And so one of the first ways we did it was back in actually, we did this a long time ago. We did this in something called the More Effective Schools, the More Essential Schools that the UFT did pre-Ocean Hill-Brownsville to try to create the first precursor of community schools and wraparound services in areas that were disproportionately Black and brown in New York City. And we negotiated a bunch of supports around them and had them in the contract. And then the Lindsay administration and others, because of the issues around funding, they just vitiated it. They just ended it. And it was one of the issues, frankly, in the 1967 strikes that we did. Lots of just a little bit of history. But what we tried to do in 1999, the Chancellor's District, how to erect a school that was actually, instead of closing it, turning it around with various different ways of supports and paying people more and having an extended day and turning those schools around. In 2004, a parent organization, CC9, the Community Collaborative of District 9, which had done a lot of research on this work, they came to us and they said, we are losing teachers in the South Bronx all the time, new teachers. They're not prepared. We don't mentor them. We don't do what we need to do for them. How do we work together to change this? And the UFT and this community group worked together with a set of proposals, including lead teachers or superior or great teachers actually then spending half their day in a classroom with new teachers to really do direct mentoring like that. And what we did was we actually, and this was during the Joel Klein era, and he wasn't listening to us and he wasn't listening to the community group. And we just said, okay, fine. We're gonna actually invite CC9 to sit on our side of the bargaining table, and we're gonna bargain this. So you can't try to separate us, and you can't try to tell them, no, 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 that didn't happen at the bargaining table. So we just tried something of doing this together. And it's frankly, it so freaked out the administration at that time that, you know, they actually started bargaining with us in a way that they hadn't done before, in something that they said was really none of our business, which of course was our business because it was about how we recruit, retain, nurture, and support teachers so that they could do great work with kids. And frankly, over the course of the next few years, what a shock. The test scores in South Bronx went up. The retention rates of teachers went up. And so, you know, it was one of the ways that we started talking around the country about bargaining for the common good. And what Mary Catherine did in St. Paul, and what so many people have now done since, is we've focused on this concept of community schools, how you wrap services around schools, how you make schools kind of like one-stop shopping, how you actually have the kind of things that Marc was talking about in terms of the post office. Like, why don't we have family workshops? Why don't we do the kind of reading circles with parents, community nights, have legal services on housing issues for parents in a school, have a washing machine and dryer in a school, have mental health services in a school, have medical services and clinics in a school, wrap those services around, and then also make sure, to borrow a concept that Chris just said, how do we make sure we have the guidance counselors, the social workers, the nurses that we need, so that we are having a holistic effect, not only for kids, but for their families? How do we have, you know, aligned tutoring to what we're doing during the day? And a whole bunch of other things, English as a second language, creating those kind of workshops for parents on weekends. So that's the kind of what, when you hear in our space, people talk about community schools and wrapping services around, it's an empowerment model, but it is also a service model of bringing to families what is needed to help families thrive. And then the last example I will use right now, which Mary Catherine keeps on saying to me, I should really focus on, is that we have done a huge amount on the issue of student debt. And, you know, if you think about what, and, you know, you think about the issues that burden people. Now, I hear a lot of people my age and older say, well, we paid for college. And I remember my last coupon book, paying my last coupon. Yes, I am from the dinosaur age, from, you know, and, you know, for law school, and doing the ritualistic burning the rest of the coupon book. But I could handle those $300 a month payments that I made, you know, for 10 years or so, and then they were over. What is happening these days for students in terms of student debt, and it wasn't solved by the federal government taking over Sallie Mae and all those Freddie Mac and all those things, is abysmal, because people get put in the wrong student debt programs. They don't know what they are signing. Those things get bought and sold like tokens. And what's happened is that people are paying student loans back till their 60s, their 70s, their 80s. And we see this in teaching, even though we have public service loan forgiveness, which we have now made better, and I'll explain that in a minute. But we see this all over, which is part of the reason why we are part of the community that is saying cancel student debt. The system is completely broken. And notwithstanding SoFi's ads and whatever, it is completely broken. So what we've tried to do is not just help our members navigate this and do the advocacy to unbreak what's broken and to fix it. But what we've done is we've brought lawsuits and other things that help the universe of people in this terrible vice, not just our own members. And in this last several months, we worked with the administration, not only for them to fix public service loan forgiveness, which essentially now means you work 10 years in the public service, you pay your loan for 10 years, the rest of it is going to be forgiven. And it's now a real promise instead of what happened during Betsy DeVos's era, where 99% or 98% of the people who applied didn't get public service loan forgiveness. But what we also did was in this process, we brought a lawsuit to make this real, not only for our members, but for everyone. And in the process of fixing public service loan forgiveness, the administration solved our lawsuit, which means that everyone who got rejected before November 2020 in public service loan forgiveness is getting another chance, is getting another bite at that apple, and automatically. And everyone afterwards has another bite to fix it, where the government is going to tell people how to fix it, not just to say, you're out of luck. And to do that going forward. And what we've done is we've worked with a private sector entity called Summer. We make this benefit free for our members, but it is now available for everyone to basically figure out, it's kind of like a tax navigator, figure out exactly how to put your papers together in a way that the government sees it, approves it, how to dot the I's and cross the T's. And what is happening, and just like when you negotiate a contract and you see the kind of life changes it means, like when Marc was talking about those contract negotiations and Chris was talking about what happened in Buffalo. What you saw here, when someone sees their loan documents, they're all of a sudden, one day, on Monday, they owed $85,000. On Tuesday, they see it go down to zero. That's life-changing, because that means that $300, that $400, that $500, that $600, that $1,000 a month that they are paying ad infinitum, that they no longer, as a result, can't think about a house, can't think about a car, can't think about whatever else they want to do in terms of raising a family. That burden that they borrowed so that they could get an education, that burden is then gone. That's part of bargaining or acting for the common good, just like we do when we're doing a legislative push or other kinds of things. And it is what you're hearing these three amazing unions trying to do, and where our members are very embracive of the work that we're doing for communities. Back at you.
Thank you so much, Randy. I want to thank Randy and Marc and Chris. It is not lost on me how your stories relate to each other, from financial security to connecting all of us. They are all stellar and multiple examples of working for the common good. I think your stories are both inspiring and motivating. Clearly, you have all demonstrated that wherever a union has power and a common good idea, we have the potential to pursue it. And you have taken that potential and you have turned it into the pursuit of victories for entire communities. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your time today. As you know, participants today are going to go to breakout sessions next, where they are going to workshop their own next steps or even first steps in common good work. based on what they heard today and based on the work our facilitators will do for them. Randy, Mark, and Chris, I want to thank you again for sharing your common good work, your examples of how to push the boundaries of the work we do alongside our communities to improve life for everyone. They serve as incredible examples of what can be accomplished when we think bigger and bolder. Joe, I want to thank you for kicking us off with that incredible history, so we understand where in the timeline of union empowerment we are all stepping into when we pursue common good work, that we are joining a legacy of unions that's over a century old, and that union work that has been going on for decades. We are now going to take a break until 12:15 Eastern Time, when participants are going to have time to work with experienced union leaders and exploring common good work at the bargaining table and beyond in small groups. These groups will be fantastic opportunities to explore the next steps each of you can take to join the ranks of union activists across the country working for the common good. Then we'll see everyone back here at 1:30 Eastern Time for a closing plenary with insights and inspirations from another cadre of fantastic union leaders. Thanks, everybody. See you shortly.